I walked into my own funeral wearing the same suit I'd packed for a business trip to Munich. The organ music stopped mid-note. A woman near the front row screamed and dropped straight to the floor. My son stood next to my casket, and when he saw my face, all the color drained out of his. Before I tell you how I got there, standing alive in a chapel full of people crying over an empty coffin, I need you to understand something. 5 days earlier, I didn't know I was dead either. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story only gets heavier from here, and you don't want to miss where it ends up. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 67 years old, and I spent almost 4 decades building an electronics company out of a rented garage in Columbus, Ohio, into something worth around $100 million. I started that company with 2 employees, a stack of unpaid bills, and a wife who believed in me even when the bank didn't. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because it matters later. Money like that changes how people look at you, and it definitely changes how people look at what happens to it once you're gone. I have 1 son. His name is Bradley. I raised him alone after his mother passed when he was young, and I gave him everything I never had growing up: a good school, a seat at my company the moment he graduated, a house near mine so we could stay close. My trust. I want you to remember that word. Trust. Because this whole story is about what happens when someone spends it without ever asking. I came home from a business trip overseas feeling sick, some kind of stomach bug I picked up on the flight. So I drove myself to the hospital just to get checked out. Nothing dramatic. I figured they'd give me fluids, run some blood work, and send me home by dinner. The waiting room was slow that day, and by the time a nurse finally called my name, I had almost fallen asleep in the chair. A hospital administrator pulled up my file on her computer, went quiet, and then looked at me the way you look at someone who shouldn't be standing in front of you. She asked me very carefully if I was aware that I had passed away 5 days earlier. I actually laughed. It sounded like a mistake, a mixed-up chart, wrong patient, the kind of clerical error you hear about and shake your head at. Then she turned the screen around so I could see it myself. There it was, a death certificate, filed and processed through the system, listing a heart attack in Germany as the cause of death, my full name, my date of birth, my social security number, and right there under next of kin, the person who reported my death, was my son's name, Bradley Higgins. I sat in that plastic chair reading my own name on a legal document declaring me gone, and for a moment the room felt like it tilted sideways. I sat in that hospital parking lot for almost an hour before I could make myself drive home. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. My first instinct was denial. Systems make mistakes. Paperwork gets crossed. Somewhere a clerk typed the wrong name into the wrong field, and this would all get sorted out with a phone call. But the more I replayed it in my head, the less it felt like an accident. A few weeks before my trip, Bradley had started asking a lot of questions about this state. Who inherits what? How the company gets divided if something happens to me? Where I kept the important documents, the deeds, the insurance policies, the passwords to accounts he had never needed before. At the time, I told myself it was normal for a son in his 30s to start thinking about the future. I didn't think it was reconnaissance. When I got home, I walked straight into my study, and it did not look right. Files were missing from the cabinet where I kept them. My personal safe had been left slightly open, the kind of open you get when someone closes in a hurry and doesn't check the latch. I sat down at my desk that night and pulled up the company's financial records, and that is when everything cracked open. Bradley had racked up more than $2 million in gambling debt, sports betting apps, online poker, a couple of trips to casinos out of state that I never knew about. Despite a strong salary at my own company, he had been living far beyond it, borrowing from people you do not want to owe money to, taking out loans against assets he didn't legally have the right to touch yet, and losing more every single week. A man drowning in debt that size does not sit around waiting patiently for an inheritance that might come in 20 years. Sometimes he decides to speed up the timeline himself. The next morning, before I had even figured out my next move, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it and found my elderly neighbor standing on my porch dressed head to toe in black, holding flowers, and looking at me like they had seen something rise up out of ground. One of them nearly dropped the bouquet she was holding. They told me Bradley had informed the entire neighborhood that I had died overseas. He had called my business partners personally. He had posted a long, emotional tribute on social media about the father he supposedly lost, complete with old photos of the two of us that people had been commenting on for days. And he had already scheduled the funeral for that very morning at a chapel just outside the city. I stood there in my doorway, still in yesterday's clothes, and felt something shift in me. I wasn't angry yet, not in the way you'd expect. I was calculating. If Bradley had gone this far, publicly, financially, legally, involving neighbors and co-workers and strangers on the internet, then quietly confronting behind closed doors would only give him room to spin a story before anyone else ever heard the truth. So I asked my neighbors for one favor. Don't tell anyone I'm alive. Get dressed like you were already planning to. Go to that funeral like nothing has changed. I'll take it from there myself. Before I did anything else, I spent the rest of that morning gathering every piece of paper I could find. Bank statements showing gambling withdrawals. Dozens of them, some from apps I had never even heard of. Loan documents with forged signatures that looked close to mine, but weren't quite right if you knew what my actual handwriting looked like after 40 years of signing contracts. I printed screenshots of the death certificate filing, the timestamps, everything. Then I called Harold, my attorney of almost 30 years, the man who had handled every major decision in my business life. Harold had already heard I was dead. Someone from my own company had called him with condolences 2 days earlier, and he had genuinely believed it. Had even started drafting condolence language for a company statement. When I told him I was standing very much alive in my kitchen, there was a long silence on the line, long enough that I asked if he was still there. Then he said one sentence I will never forget. He said, "Get to that funeral, and I will meet you there with everything we need to end this the right way." Harold spent the next several hours preparing emergency legal filings, fraud referrals to the appropriate agencies, and requests to freeze every account connected to my estate and my company before Bradley could touch a single dollar of it. This part matters, because a story like this only lands if you understand that justice takes preparation, not just a dramatic entrance. Real accountability takes paperwork, timing, and someone in your corner who moves fast. If you're feeling the story so far, tap that subscribe button now, because segment 7 is where everything changes in one room. The chapel outside Columbus was packed. Friends, cousins, business partners, old employees, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all sitting in rows facing a closed casket with my name engraved on a small plate at the front. I stood outside those double doors in the same suit from my trip, and for 1 second, my hand actually shook on the handle. Part of me wondered if I was about to make things worse by walking in there. Then I thought about that forged signature. I thought about the missing files, the frozen look on my neighbors' faces, the tribute post with our old photos. I pushed the doors open. The organ stopped mid-note. A woman in the second row screamed and went straight to the floor. Somebody near the back fainted into their chair, and someone else knocked over a folding chair scrambling to get up. The room went completely silent, the kind of silence you can actually feel pressing against your chest. And at the very front, standing beside my own casket in a black suit, pretending to mourn a father he had tried to erase, was Bradley. He looked at me like his whole body had forgotten how to work, like his legs might give out right there next to the flowers he'd picked out for a funeral that was never supposed to have a body in the room to witness it. I walked down that aisle slowly, greeting people as I passed, watching grown adults look at me like I had climbed out of the ground myself. An old business partner grabbed my arm just to check that I was solid. When I reached the front, I stood face to face with my son for the first time since he had declared me dead to the entire world. I told the room exactly what had happened. I told him about the missing documents, the open safe, the forged death certificate filed in Germany while I was very much alive at a business conference, with hotel records and travel logs sitting right there prove it. I told him about the gambling debt, over $2 million, and the plan to inherit $50 million before anyone could catch on to what he had done. Bradley kept saying he could explain, that it wasn't what it looked like, but the words weren't coming out the way he needed them to, and his voice was cracking on every sentence. That's when the chapel doors opened again, and Harold walked in carrying a stack of legal papers thick enough that people in the back rows actually turned to look. Right there, In front of everyone Bradley had lied to for days. Harold served him with civil fraud lawsuits, a criminal complaint, and an emergency freeze on every account tied to the estate. Someone in the crowd had already called a local news station because word about a man attending his own funeral travels faster than either of us expected. Reporters showed up within the hour, cameras and microphones pushing through the chapel doors. Bradley ran out of that building with cameras chasing him down the front steps, and that footage ended up being some of the strongest evidence against him later on. The story went national almost overnight. A businessman from Ohio walking into his own funeral after his son declared him dead is not something people scroll past on their phones. Public sympathy landed heavily on my side, and Bradley's reputation collapsed just as fast, especially once his gambling debts and the loan forgeries became public knowledge through the reporting. During the trial, prosecutors laid out everything piece by piece. Hotel records from Munich, conference attendance sheets with my signature and the date printed right on them, flight documents showing exactly when I landed and when I left, social media check-ins from colleagues who had been standing next to me overseas during the exact days Bradley claimed I had died. I testified that I had given him temporary access to business paperwork while I traveled, the kind of trust you give family without a second thought, without ever imagining it would be used against you, and that he had used that access to build a fraud instead of protecting the company we had spent years growing together. Bradley's lawyer argued it was a misunderstanding brought on by stress and addiction, that he genuinely believed I had passed and panicked. But forged signatures and a scheduled funeral complete with a printed program do not happen by accident, and the jury saw that clearly. They found him guilty on every major charge, including filing false government documents, wire fraud, and attempted inheritance fraud. The court permanently stripped his inheritance rights and barred him from ever holding a position in my company again in any capacity. The sentence included probation, steep financial penalties, and community service. It wasn't the harshest outcome prosecutors had originally pushed for, but I didn't want revenge sitting in that courtroom. I wanted the truth on record permanently, where nobody could rewrite it later, and I got exactly that. Life after that trial looked nothing like the life before it. Interview requests came in for weeks, from local stations at first, and then national ones once the story kept spreading. A production company eventually approached me about turning the whole ordeal into a film, and after some back and forth over the details, I signed an agreement that let me stay involved as a consultant while they told the story properly instead of exaggerating it for effect. Around the same time, I received a serious offer to sell my company for close to $100 million. The same company I had built from a rented garage in Columbus almost 40 years earlier with nothing but 2 employees and a stubborn refusal to quit. I said yes. Surviving something like this changes what you want out of the years you have left. I wasn't interested in more boardrooms, more contracts, or more legal battles waiting around every corner. I wanted peace, and I wanted to spend time with people who had actually earned my trust instead of taking it. These days, I spend most of my time with Harold, the one person who never doubted me for a second once he knew the truth. And I'm slowly learning what it feels like to build a life instead of just protecting one from people who are supposed to love you. What Bradley did nearly cost me everything I spent a lifetime creating, but also showed me exactly who stands beside you when everything falls apart, and who runs the other way with a stack of your paperwork. If this story affected you the way I hope it did, subscribing genuinely helps us keep telling stories like this one, and it means more to this channel than you probably realize. Thank you for sitting through this one with me. There are more stories coming, and I promise you, some of them go even further than this.